Today, I'll be talking with Travis Dunn, a policy and financial strategist and analyst in the transportation industry. His particular expertise is on transportation funding with a focus on road usage charging. So he'll be explaining what road usage charging is and why it could be the future of transportation funding in the United States and around the world. So Travis, you are an expert in road usage charging, also known as RUC. So what is RUC and where did the idea for RUC come from?
Road usage charging, or RUC, is the idea of paying for road usage based on how many miles you drive. The idea really is not that new. We've been paying for road use based on how much we drive since the gas tax, which went into effect in 1919, first in the state of Oregon. And if you think about it, the gas tax is basically a road usage charge. The difference is that today vehicles get fuel efficiencies ranging from 5 or 6 miles per gallon for heavy vehicles, all the way up to electric cars that don't use fuel at all. And so switching from a gasoline tax to pay for road usage to a pure distance-based charge to pay for road usage is the concept behind what we call RUC.
So some of the most forward-thinking DOTs in the United States have actively studied RUC, and I know you've worked with many of them. Why do many transportation agencies think that RUC could be the future?
A lot of agencies and lawmakers think that RUC could be the future for the simple reason that it's a meaningful source of revenue. The gas tax in the United States generates close to $100 billion per year at the federal and state and local levels. That's a tremendous amount of money that we're going to need to find a replacement source for in the future when we simply aren't using as much or any gasoline because we're driving in cleaner, more fuel efficient electric vehicles. There are a few options for what types of revenue mechanisms can generate that amount of revenue. Road usage charge is one of them. A few of the other contenders are things like vehicle registration fees, so increasing the amount that we pay every year simply to own a vehicle. But that can get pretty costly and hit folks in the pocketbook for having to simply own a vehicle, paying a flat fee per year, which they tend to have to owe all at once. And it doesn't really bear any relationship to how much they drive. So a road usage charge is regarded as a preferable alternative to that because it does connect what we drive to what we owe. There are a few other alternatives out there that can generate the amount of money that the gas tax has generated to invest in our roads and bridges for the last century.
So maybe I spend too much time on Twitter, I probably do, but it seems like when RUC, or even the basic idea of charging vehicle owners per mile traveled, when that comes up, it immediately generates intense interest and debate. Why do you think that RUC is, perhaps somewhat controversial?
RUC can be regarded as controversial. It doesn't have to be, but there are a few reasons why it tends to generate a lot of emotion and a lot of controversy in some quarters. One reason is pretty straightforward. It's regarded basically as a tax. I mean, we think of road usage charging as a user fee, but from the customer's point of view, for the most part, Americans have to drive. They need access to the roads to get to work, to get to shopping, to get to medical appointments and recreation. And so charging for road usage is regarded as a tax. In fact, the gas tax, which is a user fee, is called a tax. So anytime we're talking about taxes, we're going to generate some level of concern, skepticism, and questions about how exactly we are designing this fiscal policy tool to be fair, to be efficient, and to generate money that is actually used for the purpose that it's designed. In this case, money to invest in those roads and bridges that we're charging for. The other reason that it generates a lot of concern and sometimes opposition is because it's different. It's change. People aren't used to getting a bill or reporting their miles driven and seeing that amount in writing and having to pay for it. The gas tax is a hidden tax. It's not printed on the receipt. In most states, the amount isn't even posted on the gas pumps. It's already baked into the price of gas that consumers are paying at the pump. So when we switch from a tax that's been largely under the radar for a century to a tax that is put in front of people to see and consider and regard, that's going to generate some interest because it's a new thing that they haven't seen before. So a lot of our research in helping states to overcome concerns and figure out how to implement a tax in a way that's fair and agreeable to end consumers has to do with that experience of seeing the tags. I think one area that there tends to be a lot of misunderstanding about RUC is the issue of privacy. When people simply hear the concept of pay by the mile and they don't hear any details, they tend to fill in those gaps with things like imagining they're going to be required to install a GPS device into their vehicle. And we know that's unpopular, and we know it's really not viable. So really the only new piece of information that's needed for a road usage charge is a periodic mileage-driven total. And that can be gathered in a number of different ways. It doesn't require GPS. It doesn't require that consumers and constituents provide their location information to the government. And in none of the programs where RUC has been enacted is that the case.
2030 feels to me like a benchmark year. I know here in Massachusetts, all vehicles, new vehicles sold are expected to be electric by 2030. And I read that the White House just called for 50% of new cars sold nationwide to be electric by 2030. In your view, how many states will have implemented some version of RUC by 2030 to adapt to the changing profile of vehicles that will be sold at that point?
Today, there are 3 states that have enacted a road usage charge program. And I think that by the end of this decade, it's fair to say that there will probably be closer to a dozen states, maybe even more, that have a road usage charge, at least in law, if not also in operation. And the reason is increasing adoption of highly fuel efficient and electric cars. And the impulse for that isn't just coming from Washington, D.C. and from regulatory and other government incentives, like purchase price incentives at the federal and state levels. It's also coming from the marketplace. By the end of this decade, the typical consumer, when they go to buy a new car, regardless of whether they want a pickup or an SUV or a crossover or a small sedan, they're going to have a range of choices that we couldn't even fathom a couple of years ago that include a wide range of electric cars. Once that happens and we start to see adoption of electric cars on a larger scale, I think we'll see more and more states realize that it's time to do something about how we pay for our road systems. If you're taxing a shrinking tax base like gasoline, you're inevitably squeezing certain consumers who are sticking with gasoline vehicles for whatever reason, and that creates an inequity where you have a shrinking proportion of the electorate that's paying for roads. And I think state governments are going to be the first to realize that they should do something about that.
Well, I can't wait to see where the policy goes from here. This is totally fascinating stuff. Travis, thank you so much for talking through all this stuff with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Staying up with the latest trends in revenue, emerging technology, and operations is a challenge for any transportation agency. That's why CDM Smith has compiled the latest thinking from our experts on our On-Demand Advisor website. Short videos with insights you can't find anywhere else. The link is below.